All right, so we are back with our returning champion, Kelly Moore, and our top newest contender here, James Dorr. And we are talking about an article in ProPublica titled Roadside Drug Tests Used to Convict People Aren't Particularly Accurate. Courts are beginning to prevent their use. And Kelly, tell us what we're talking about here in terms of a roadside drug test versus maybe a lab test.
Sure. One example would be that if somebody gets pulled over literally on the side of the road and somehow the officer knows or believes that they have drugs on their person or in the vehicle, they can test it on the street. The point is to try and see what substance is contained in what the officer believes to be those alleged drugs. And they can use these tests for probable cause to arrest the person. But then the drugs should be taken into the officer's custody following proper chain of custody procedures and sent to the lab. Like here, there's an Illinois State Police crime lab.
Yeah.
And then they would test it in the lab, which is way more accurate than a roadside test.
Yeah, so we're sort of comparing the accuracy of a field test. So let's describe a field test. You've seen this in cops before and everywhere else, right? Where, yeah, there's whatever it is. There's some substance found on the side of the road. The officer sort of drops it in a vial or puts it down, shakes it up, sort of, and sees what color it turned, right? And there's a sort of a guide that the officers use to say, oh, it turned blue, this must be an opioid. It turned red, it must be cannabis, whatever, right? You get the idea. And this article talks about the accuracy of that test.
Right. One of the things that it actually talks about is that there are so many legal household items that can cause a change in the color of the solution to like support the article's conclusion that these tests are not accurate. But one of the things they said was chocolate can make the solution turn the same color as what's supposed to be heroin.
Chocolate. I remember when they first invented chocolate. Sweet, sweet chocolate. I always hated it.
Big difference between chocolate and heroin.
Yeah, both addictive.
Yeah, that's true. So James, here in Illinois, typically, how is this used in court? I mean, do they rely on the field tests in court?
I think they would use it more for finding a probable cause in court, not necessarily proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I know even the crime labs can have their own problems, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We've seen mislabeled things and, tests that simply weren't run. We've seen a lot of things out of the crime lab in the past, and this in other states. But this here is, you have an officer on the side of the road given some vial. It's like, okay, it says here they're roughly $2 a piece. I can't imagine the government spending only $2 for these things. But at any rate,
yeah,
the cheapness of this calls into mind the suspect quality of these tests, perhaps.
Right. So let's talk about what they are using them for. At least here in Illinois, our experience has been that they do the field side test and someone's going to get arrested based on those results, right?
Traffic stop, something's found in the car by the officer somewhere during that stop.
Yep. So then that's the probable cause. They're arrested. And then later on, during the course of the case, at some point, the actual, we call the lab, from the Illinois State Police crime lab comes back and says, yeah, this is in fact, whatever the substance is and the exact amount and things like that. So generally speaking, in order to convict someone, at least here in Illinois, they're doing it the right way. They're getting the full lab. But there are many situations where people can still get really, really jammed up just based on this field test alone.
Yeah, I mean, especially with cannabis being legal here in Illinois, it's still like alcohol when you're driving. It can't be accessible to you. It needs to be sealed in an odor-proof, child-proof container. And that's where a lot of people get jammed up because they're carrying it on them, a legal amount, but they just don't have it in the right package.
They'll say something to the cop like, well, I thought weed was legal. I can't have it. And then like, oh, here we go.
Yep. So. Every time. Yep.
Yeah. So certain villages are having policies where, say, if it's under 5 grams, they're not sending it to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, right? For like cost efficiency. but they're still charging them with a Class A misdemeanor unlawful possession of cannabis by a driver.
Right.
So even the charge itself can have major implications. You need to hire an attorney. It costs money. If you have some sort of job, if you're a professional license, or maybe you're in security, you need a FOID card or carrying a gun or something, it can have major implications just to be charged with it. And then if you are lucky to be found not guilty or get it dismissed, then you have to expunge it. That costs money in 6 months, so
Yep.
you could be dealing with this for a year.
This little $2 vial
Yes.
can cause you to be in legal jeopardy and have to defend yourself, like Kelly was saying, in a formal manner in court. You're being charged. Prosecutors relying on this. They're not going to get it tested. They're taking this $2 cheap tube here,
Pool
this
test.
vial.
The pool test. That's
Well,
what I
yeah,
think of.
exactly.
You dip it in test the chlorine,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, it turned blue.
Yeah, there you
Okay.
go. Don't go in the water.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jump in, kids.
Yeah.
You're not going in the pool, now you're going to jail.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think of when you see that
Yeah.
we talk about those roadside tests.
The other thing is, do the officers even understand scientifically how these tests work and, what their accuracy
No,
is?
they don't.
What about contaminants on the street too? Are they wearing gloves? Is dirt getting in there?
Right.
Is their dog's hair from the trunk getting in it?
Right.
Officer could reuse a pair of gloves that he just used the last arrest on a bunch of fentanyl or something.
yeah.
Next thing, well, that's the only set I got. It's only the stupid vial. Who cares?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Boom. So
Yep. It's totally possible.
And how would we know that? I mean, even if we wore a body worn camera, we see them pull a pair of gloves out. We don't know that they're fresh.
So obviously as issues there, especially since most drug cases are felonies, at least here in Illinois.
If it's something other than cannabis.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. If it's other than cannabis. And so, you're talking about giving someone a permanent felony record. Let's make sure we're confirming what this substance is to the highest degree of standards. Other scenarios where someone can get in quite a bit of trouble based off of just this roadside test could be like a violation of bail bond. So say somebody is arrested for something and they have a bond, right? They had to post, say, $1,000 to be released. That case is pending. They're on bond. And part of that agreement is that they do not get in trouble while on bond. So they get arrested again. This time found in possession of something, and it's a field test. You can bet they're locking him up, right? They're changing his bond from $1,000 to $10,000 or $100,000 or whatever, and that person is now getting locked up because they caught a second case. Yes, but that second case, at least initially, is purely based off of that vial, that $2 vial. Eventually, we can assume that they'll have that lab test, but you could really be taking away someone's freedom again based off that $2 test.
you're sitting in custody while you're waiting for the
Yes,
test. Too.
exactly.
Right. Yeah, they need a bond for the new case and then a bond hearing on the case that you violated your bond on. So you're going to
Yes.
go in front of that judge that's been seeing you and knows that you picked up another case, and they're going to be upset that you're not abiding by their court orders, and then that could increase the bond. Maybe you don't have the money to post that, and now you're sitting in custody.
Yep. Again, because of a $2 test.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the courts have ruled, according to this article, that these test kits do not meet a scientific admissibility standard. Therefore, it doesn't support the grand jury's indictment in this example here. In other words, courts have ruled that this just isn't enough.
Yeah, so these field tests are not admissible in court at trial, for example, to convict somebody beyond a reasonable doubt of possessing that substance. But that's different than what we're talking about right now. It's just using it for probable cause to charge somebody with a new crime. So you could ultimately get the case dismissed or be found not guilty of the new crime, but in the interim, potentially your rights and freedoms are being taken away, or the judge might add additional restrictions like an electronic home monitoring bracelet, drug tests, maybe a scram bracelet,
Yep.
something along those lines.
So another scenario that we see and that the article brings up is somebody taking a plea, somebody pleading to a charge in the very early initial stages of their case. And that happens. Maybe perhaps more so in other places than it does in Illinois, but someone gets arrested, they do the $2 field test, they go in front of a judge on their first court date, second court date, they get an offer. right? That person, maybe they've sat there for a day, a week, a month, right? And they get an offer from the prosecutor's office that says, hey, plead to X, Y, and Z, and we'll release you or whatever.
Time served.
Yeah, time considered served, time actually served. And that's a pretty, I got to imagine that is a pretty enticing offer if you've sat there for a month. Really, all I got to do is say yes, and you're going to release me today. Or I can sit in custody and fight this case for the next 3, 6, 12 months. It's pretty enticing, right? But again, at that point, they don't have the lab test. It is based off of and they're getting that conviction based off of the field test.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that happens too much here because the state's attorneys are under a strict timeline to bring somebody to a preliminary hearing, for example, and you can't have a preliminary hearing without the lab test. So many times if they're not getting the lab test back, then the case is getting dismissed. But in the situation where somebody's sitting in custody because they can't post their bond while you're waiting for that lab test over the 30 days and people are missing their family and their children and work and everything, maybe they might ask their attorney to go to the state's attorney and ask for an offer to get them out.
Yeah, I think it does. Yes. You think Cook County, yes. But in other counties, I mean, they'll ask you to waive preliminary hearing while they make an offer. I mean, they can drag it out. There are ways that a prosecutor can, I want to say, use it to their advantage, right? To sort of entice a plea. That sounds a bit more nefarious than it might be, but the timeline really matters when you're in custody. James, tell me about the accuracy here.
All right. My favorite part of this article, and this happens in many scenarios where you're going, even with field sobriety tests, you have an officer on the stand, you're trying to ask questions about the accuracy, right? And you run into this roadblock of, I don't know. And if he doesn't know, then you got to bring out manuals and refresh memory and all that kind of stuff. So here, do you know what the accuracy rate is for these tests? The public defender asks. There's the officer. No, I do not. Then he asks, had the prison taught him any about false positive results during training, right? So what did you learn during your training? No, I was not. So he was never trained on this.
Yep.
So this officer's thinking, well, this is what they gave me. I was trained to use this. This is what I'm supposed to use. But simple basic questions like, well, what is the accuracy rate of this? It's not 100%, right? What is it? They don't know.
Yep. And that can be a real problem. And you're right. I think you likened it to something we know quite well, which is standard field sobriety tests or breathalyzer tests. I mean, there are varying degrees of accuracy there for sure. Let's take the breathalyzer. There is a breathalyzer back at the station, which should have been calibrated, and there's log books, and it is a machine that is intended to be highly accurate. You can liken that to the lab test, right? And then there's the PBT, which is sort of this handheld device that you can buy on Amazon that is less accurate, but people are arrested.
It's still periodically certified.
Sure.
There's, and both those devices you pointed out are certified by a breath op or somebody who's trained in testing these machines. This vial, I don't know who's testing these things.
I think the manufacturer, right?
Yeah, that would have been it.
Right.
And they would do it by batch, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think, too, like the officers have an understanding that the portable breath test is not as reliable as the breath test at the station, right? Because we see in so many DUIs that they tell our clients, oh, this isn't admissible in court, which is not 100%
Can't be used against
true.
you, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Right.
This is just for me. I'm going to let you go if you're under.
Yeah.
Whereas these officers don't, according to this article, don't seem to know what the accuracy is one way or the other. And that could really affect how the officer might treat somebody, right? Like if they believe that this is a scientific, like as almost like their lab analysts,
It changed color.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. You're guilty of possessing cocaine or heroin, then, they might do a lot more, like tow your car, throw the book at you, maybe not treat you as well. Whereas if they were like, we're not 100% sure, let's kind of give this guy maybe the benefit of the doubt or treat him more humanely.
Right. Yes, exactly. It is wild to think that people are getting put in handcuffs and in some cases not getting any bond. In other words, sitting in custody because of a $2 test that was made by some manufacturer somewhere. Maybe it wasn't even maybe it was manufactured in China for all we know. Like we have no insight really into that. But like you said, because it came up purple, well, then lock them up.
Yeah. I had a case where my client was the driver. He had a passenger. Somehow the car got searched. I don't remember the details, but I remember the search was good. And they ended up finding a baggie of what they believed was cocaine underneath the passenger seat. They let the passenger go and charged my guy with PCS, which is a
driver.
felony, and they seized his vehicle. And we ended up winning based on a motion, like about who actually possessed
Right.
the cocaine. And we got his vehicle back because we won the felony. But I mean, this was probably a year and a half, thousands of dollars.
Sure.
If you owe a car note, you still have to pay that, even though you don't have access to your vehicle. And that was all based on a field test of the
Yeah.
cocaine.
And we do see labs can take a while.
Absolutely.
Waiting on the labs, which we're saying is a very important piece of trying to convict someone for possessing drugs. So it's important, but it can take quite a while. And
I mean,
so
and
it can,
understandably, right? If
Yeah.
you think about every single case that has evidence be sent to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, whether it's drugs, blood, guns, bullets, fingerprints, I mean.
But that's why these labs exist, is to test this evidence, ensure some basic quality here, some
Due
you know,
process.
Yeah, that's all wrapped in due process.
Yep.
It's all part and parcel of it.
Yep. I think an interesting part here, back to, just the plethora of, first of all, substances they're testing for, and then the things that can affect it. We talked about gloves. We talked about, other contaminants. Here in the article, an executive at one of the manufacturing companies says that they themselves keep a list of over 50 substances that can influence the outcome of this field test. Every time I go like this, right? Shake it up and see what color it turns. They have 50. There's over 50 substances that can affect that. So it is absolutely conceivable that one of those 50 is out there, contaminating this.
Boy,
test.
we need to get a list of those 50, don't we?
Yeah, I know.
I was going to say, we're not being tendered that in discovery as
Yeah.
exculpatory evidence with the field tests.
Right. Nope. That would be too much work for them. So
One thing that I thought was interesting in the article was that they talked about testing inmate mail. So like somebody's in, whether it be a county department of corrections or a state department of corrections, right? They don't have a lot of rights to privacy in their mail, but they were testing all the envelopes to see if there was drug residue on them. And it was like an insane amount, right? That was saying that they came back. And if the field tests showed that there was drug residue, then the inmate was like getting put in solitary.
right.
Which is absolutely crazy to me. They said it was even occurring on lawyer mail.
Right.
Oh, it's
Legal
like-
mail, where parole was being denied based on
Receiving mail.
Receiving mail.
Right.
How does the inmate have any control over that? And also, like,
They don't.
you as the attorney, you send them mail, and the next thing you know, they're in solitary because... Yeah,
because somebody handling that envelope somewhere along the line,
Yes.
they had something on their hands, it says here, foods, household cleaners, or it could have been drugs. Doesn't
Sure.
matter. The whole post office, everybody.
Yep.
Staff at the prison who handled it first.
Right. And this poor person in prison who never even saw the mail, is getting put in solitary confinement. Hey, come on up. You're coming to solitary with me because you got some piece of mail from some unknown person that you never even saw.
And if you know the rules, anybody can send you anything. You're in custody.
Correct.
You can't control what's sent to you.
Exactly.
I could look somebody up in, like, IDOC or Cook County
Yeah.
right now and send them mail.
I'm dating his wife. I don't want him to get paroled next week.
Yeah. There you
You know,
go.
I'm
Right.
asking
Where's the
for.
due process there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then they determined that 38% of those were inaccurate.
38% of the
Yeah.
things that the mail that tested positive was inaccurate.
Yeah, it says court records show that between August 2019 and August 2020, lab analysis found that 38% of the inmate mail that tested positive did not contain the alleged drug.
It's a big number.
Oops, 4 out of
Yeah.
10 times
Yeah.
that we put you in solitary
Whoopsie.
confinement were wrong.
Well, right,
Yeah.
6 out of 10. What do you want?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That is wild. Here in Cook County, we're seeing that as well now. They've restricted attorneys and really anybody from bringing paper into Cook County Jail. I don't know if you've seen that, but apparently for this same reason, I don't know what level of testing they're doing on it, but they're saying that bringing in paper with drugs on it is now a big problem. I don't know enough to whether or not to say it actually is, but it seems like a stretch to me.
Yeah, I mean, isn't there a statistic that like 90% of money has drugs on it,
Right.
right? So like what if you touch money
Yeah.
and then sealed the envelope or touched your paperwork to bring it into the jail?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's talk about, this is beyond the scope of the article, but let's talk about a consumption of drugs that were on paper. Like, I don't know, you can't, like, it would have to be like soaked in, you know what I mean? And how do you consume drugs?
Well, they've had problems since the 60s of LSD
Yes,
being sent into the.
sure, I
Yeah.
get it. And that's how that's the vehicle with which the drugs are distributed.
Mhm.
But that's different, I think, than there's a trace amount of cocaine on
Right,
this that I
exactly.
can't consume, or someone had smoked a joint and then now there's weed residue all over this.
Right.
It's not going to get the inmate or anybody else high, right? I think there's a real difference between those.
Exactly.
So
Right.
I don't know. It seems like a stretch to me. The
My
answer's no.
common thing is you have to police the police, right? You have to test evidence
Sure.
and not believe everything at face value. The prosecutors present it, police says, police officer presents it. It's like, take a step back. You want some accuracy. You want to make sure that my client's due process rights are being, respected here.
Yep.
And there's not some arbitrary test or rule or something that's putting them in hot water. So it's our job really as defense attorneys to test that evidence. This is just another piece of the puzzle.
Yep, I think you're exactly right. So, it seems, at least according to this article, that it is starting to come to light in certain courthouses, certain jurisdictions, that these field tests are not incredibly reliable. Now, again, here in Illinois, we don't really run into this. These field tests are not being used to convict somebody. But what's sort of your best guess on this? What's the future hold for these roadside tests?
Should be interesting to see. I mean, hopefully if they're being used here in prisons, that will go by the wayside, especially because inmates already have such few rights and probably lack so much due process, as we were talking about, just getting thrown in, solitary. And then with the roadside tests, I wonder if they'll either come up with more accurate roadside tests that actually could be used, to charge somebody, or if they're just going to totally go by the wayside and do what we said, like add the drug charge after you get the lab test back.
It's nice to see there's some pushback from the bench on these things. They're not just taking, probation officers to face value or police officers. They're saying, well, let's give me a little more behind this test.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. At the very least, I mean, you would hope to get some more insights into, the proper procedure and handling and accuracy of the current tests, right? And then sort of an outreach from there, if that ever happens and there's some pushback, hopefully then it would be a prompt or a push to provide, at the very least, more accurate testing that's perhaps costs more than $2, but
Right.
so be it when someone's freedom is at stake.
Yeah, I mean, as we see, though, the wheels of justice turn slow. So
Yes.
I could see this still being an ongoing issue for years, like
Yes.
getting the body-worn cameras in every department. That's been a rule for, a while,
Yeah.
and it's still not true.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
Again, push back in court, file motions, get a hearing, start bringing up these points in front of a judge, and then slowly you make your argument.
Yep.
It's a due process question. Judge, it's a reliability question. So
Also,
Yep.
I think getting the press involved is a good way to make change, because a lot of, say, departments or companies don't want the bad press.
Right.
So the more the public hears about it and has an outcry about it, the more likelihood that change is going to occur faster.
Yeah. I mean, that is astonishing when you just stop and think about it. It's private companies developing a product that is then sold to the government, and the government uses it to take away people's freedoms.
And they know that it's not accurate.
Yeah. And yes, exactly. And you have lawyers and you have other sort of, groups pushing to shed a light on that, shine a light on what these private companies are creating and what these governments are using, to convict people. So very interesting article. And like you said, I hope some good positive change comes of it.
All right, there you have it. We reacted to an article today instead of a video. Let us know how you liked it in the comments. You might not think that what we talked about today, testing drugs, is going to apply to you because maybe you don't use drugs, but policing the process is really important. We need to make sure that there's checks and balances and that everyone receives due process.